Jeb Bush, former governor of Florida. Governor Bush, you're back in the Sunshine State today. You gave a terrific speech this morning. What's the message that you're trying to send back from Tallahassee?
The message is that we need leadership to fix Washington, and I had a chance to kind of show how what I did in Tallahassee and compare what could be done in Washington as it relates to spending discipline, a balanced budget amendment, line item veto power, or a version of it that Paul Ryan has called for, reform of how the baseline budgeting process goes to make it look more like a kitchen table kind of budget rather than Washington world budgets that automatically grow. And I've proposed reducing the federal government workforce by 10% over 4 years, which is very doable given the number of employees in Washington that are qualified for retirement now. By reforming how Washington works, I think people will be more confident that it's not, put aside ideology. I have one of those too, but this is really a question of competence. The scandals, the corruption, and the sheer incompetence of Washington has really concerns people for legitimate reasons.
Well, when you talk about shedding 10% of the government workforce within 4 years, what you're saying is that when people retire, you just won't replace them. You'll replace 1 out of 3 of people who retire. Did I read you right?
Yeah, Exactly. So through attrition, you could get to 10% over 5 years based on current retirement rates. And what I'm proposing is that you reduce by 3 the number. If you hire someone, there has to be a 3-person reduction, and that accelerates it a little bit. This is what we did in Tallahassee. In a growing economy, we shrunk the workforce by 10%. It can be done. You harness technology the right way. You shift power back to the states, implement lobbying reform. You can make government more effective. I mean, think about this, Michael. We have 40 people that lost their lives because they were taken off a waiting list in a veterans hospital. 2 have been fired. Really? Only 2? The OPM disaster where 22 million HR files have been received by the Chinese government, hacking into our systems. The Inspector General of that agency said that there was real weakness there. They'd already broken in. Finally, the head of OPM resigns, but there's very little accountability. No one's been fired for the IRS corruption, which is truly striking when you think we can use the power of our taxing agency to target conservative groups. There's no accountability, none at all. And the president never accepts responsibility, and I think the next president should and has to. I think we have to fix these things, and so sharing the practical experience of being a governor in a big teeming state like Florida and then making these proposals was a lot of fun today. It brought back fond memories of the reforms that we implemented, and it seems to resonate. One of the things I proposed was a rule that I know applies in Tallahassee, and I think it applies in almost every state legislature, which is if you are there to work, you need to vote. You need to show up and vote, and if not, then your pay should be docked and as a member of Congress. I mean, I find it striking that they have a 3-day work week, and yet there's a lot of people that end up not voting at all because they have other more pressing things like raising money or campaigning for the next election. And this is not a huge burden to ask someone to show up to work. It happens in the private sector, and in all the state legislatures I know, there's a requirement that you have to have an excused absence if you're not there when session is on.
This has been interpreted by the press as kind of a slam on 3 of your opponents. 3 of your opponents are sitting U.S. senators, all 3 first-term senators, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Rand Paul. Are you intending anything regarding?
I'm really kind of saying the system itself is the problem. They're all fine people, but if they're missing votes, then they ought to change that. I mean, come on. This is the pay that people get in public life is good. It's a sacrifice to be away from your family. I admit that, but if you're there for 3 days, you ought to be able to show up and vote and or resign. That would be, and then go pursue your whatever your desires are. But showing up to work is what's required of every American. It seems to me that Congress ought to feel a duty to do the same.